Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. This is, of course, the museum's Tuesday Treasure program, where we go through some of the museum's lesser seen objects in our collection. My name, as always, is Nicole Carpenter. I am the Programs and Collections Director here at the Westport Museum for History and Culture. As we begin every program, we would like to recognize and honor the Bagusset people, who are the indigenous communities who are native to this region. We would also like to recognize that the Westport Museum and the entire town of Westport is built on and with unceded Indigenous homelands. At the museum, we're pleased to offer this program and many others free of charge, but we do have a suggested donation of $5 to keep all of these programs coming to you. We understand this is still a very difficult time, and we appreciate any support that you can give. One way that you can do that with a non-monetary donation is by following and liking us on all of our social media platforms. This will also notify you of any future programs that we hold live or recorded, actually. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Westport Museum and on Instagram at Westport History Museum. It's quite a mouthful. If you would like to catch any of our past programs, you can always go onto our Facebook or YouTube channels and just search the name of the museum and the program you're looking for. If at any time you would like to ask a question about today's program, any of the items that you are seeing, if you have an anecdote or a comment, please enter them in the chats box, and I will go through as many of those as we can at the end of our program. Tonight, I'd like to start with a game that should be up on your screen now called Round the World with Nellie Bly. And this is a game that we do hold in the museum's collection. It's actually out on loan at the moment, or else I would show it to you in person. But we do have some lovely pictures of it. This board game is from 1890, approximately, and it is based on the 72-day trip around the world that was taken by Elizabeth Cochrane, who was then 25. She completed this trip in 1890. Now, this trip, Elizabeth Cochrane, who completed this trip, is also known as Nellie Bly. She was a female reporter for the New York World in the 1890s. In 1887, just a couple of years before, she pretended to be a mentally ill woman, and she actually used this to expose the treatment of patients at the insane asylum on Blackwell Island in New York, leading to numerous reforms after the publication of her story, 10 Days in a Madhouse. You may have read a little bit about this story in the museum's exhibit, Taking the Cure. But Nellie inspired this board game when she took on this trip. And this trip was actually inspired by another trip, but a fictitious one, of course, based on Jules Verne's Around the World in 80 Days. And this caused just a frenzy of media coverage. And many in the late 19th century considered her the most famous woman in the world. It also brought a lot of new interest to Verne's novel, and it sold quite well. Now, in this game, you should have also have seen a picture of the board. Players would spin a spinner, which would dictate the number of spaces that they would move forward or around the world. And landing on certain spaces would cause them to move forward or backwards, either aiding them or causing a little bit of detriment to their trip. It's actually a beautifully illustrated board game. As we saw, it has that black outer cover, but on the inside, it's just beautiful and it's so colorful. And it, of course, has Nellie Bly's likeness on the front, making it a very, very popular game in its time. The second game that we'd like to show you this evening, also in the museum's collection, also out on loan, which we have some pictures for you. This game is called Broadway, and it is from about 1917. Now, this is a version of a game called Pollyanna, but this New York version celebrates 4 of the architectural landmarks in New York. One is the Metropolitan Life Tower at Madison Square. the Times Tower at Times Square, the Flatiron Building at Broadway and Fifth, and the Woolworth Building, at City Hall Park. And it offered a way for players to see the city and these kind of big architectural landmarks without ever leaving their house. It was hailed as a perfect armchair traveling kind of experience. How successful it was, we don't know, but it does go on to be a very popular game in the future. It actually can trace its existence back to 1883, when a 16-year-old George Parker decided to liven up a game called Everlasting, which was what he considered to be a very boring game. It was meant to teach moral lessons to young people, but he decided that it just wasn't exciting enough. And he reinvented it, adding lettered cards, changing the rules, and he called that game Banking. Eventually, this game would go on to become Monopoly, which we all know very well. Speaking of Monopoly, the third game, which is just in front of me here, this is called Townopoly Game, or the Townopoly Game of Westport. Now, this is a Westport take on Monopoly. It is dated to sometime in the 1990s. The first Townopoly game was actually created in Greenwich before it expanded to other towns. And by 1989, Norwalk, Westport, Essex, Old Saybrook, and the Candlewood Lake region, including Danbury, Bethel, and New Fairfield, all had their own Townopoly games. There was also supposed to be a Mystic version, but it's unclear if it ultimately ever culminated in an actual board game. We know that it was created by W. Matthew Seney, who was owner of JS Design Concepts of Sag Harbor, Long Island. And we do have a quote from when this game actually came out in Westport from a Miss Barbara Murray, who was president of the Murray Real Estate Company in Westport at the time. She paid quite a bit of money to be on the cover of this game, and she was quoted in saying, "I thought it was a great and clever idea and a way of getting your name out there. A lot of times you put your money into advertising and it's a one-time deal and nothing happens. But this is a good little gimmick, something you can give to your clients." The game was made in Connecticut, New York, and Massachusetts, and from a 1989 article was meant to expand into Vermont and Florida, but again, unclear if that ever happened. But we do, of course, have the beautiful game of Townopoly of Westport in our collection. I will also tell you that inside of this box, I am not going to open it this evening. It is a collection object, and I don't have my gloves with me. But on the inside, it does actually have the unopened pieces. So this is an unopened version of the game. All of the pieces are still connected together. All of the fake money is still in its envelopes, unopened. So it's kind of a pristine piece of Westport's history. And of course, it has a lot of Westport locations on it, which are just fabulous. The last game that I'd like to show you this evening is actually an education item for the museum. This is something that we can interact with, and we often play it with young people and some of our older audience members as well. This is a very popular game today. Many of our campers and other program participants love to play this game. But the original version of this game was actually very, very hard to date the original date of this game, but it was very popular in ancient Roman times and then again in the medieval period. So this is very, very old game. It's known today as Nine Men's Morris. Throughout history, it's also been known as mill or windmill. And that may be because of the shape of the board. You can see it looks a little bit like a windmill. It was also known as merrills at one point in time, which is comes from the Latin word merilis, which means gaming piece. The name Nine Men's Morris actually believe that it originated from William Shakespeare in a Midsummer Night's Dream in Act 2, Scene 1. Titania, the Queen of the Fairies, refers to a board, and she says, "The Nine Men's Morris is filled up with mud." Very often in ancient times, in the medieval period, Roman times, they would actually carve this board into a piece of stone. So it makes sense that she would say that it would be filled with mud because there were actual channels that would be filled. Some of the very oldest boards in the world exist in, well, the oldest known board is actually at Kurna in Egypt. It's a temple. The temple dates to 1400 BC, but it's unclear when the game was actually carved in, but it's one of the oldest that is known. There are other carved game boards at the Church of St. John the Baptist in north of Lancashire. There's one in the ruins of the Byzantine Church of St. John's Basilica in Selka, Turkey. And there is also one in Diocletian's Mausoleum in Split, Croatia. So it was a very popular game across a very wide part of the world as well throughout history. Now, not only will I show you this wonderful game, but I'm sure that some of you are very curious as to how this game is played. We spoke a little bit about some of the other games. There, of course, is Broadway and Tanopoly, played very much like Monopoly, and, of course, Round the World with a spinner. But this is a bit different. This is a two-player game. Each player has 9 pieces, or men. We have black and white pieces here. And the grid, or the game board, consists of 3 squares. You can see these 3 squares interconnected with some of these straight lines. Now, on this board, there are 24 intersections. And each of these intersections can be used as a spot to place a game piece. The intersection can be where 2 lines meet at a corner, or where 2 lines intersect. So here, here, here can all be used as intersections, and there are 24 total. Now, the object of the game is to create a mill. A mill is when 3 pieces create a line. You want 3 in a row, very much like tic-tac-toe. A mill can be created on what you would see as a vertical line. You can make one on a horizontal line, or you can create, well, those are the 2 types. There are versions that have diagonal lines. The true versions or the old versions do not. You cannot make a mill around a corner, so they have to be in a straight line in any configuration that you can find one. So the object of the game is to make the mill. The 2 players decide who would like to go first, either through an agreement or something like rock, paper, scissors. And what they do is, one by one, they begin to place their pieces on the board with, white should go first, or next, with the intention of making 3 in a row. Now, of course, the opposite player can block a mill with their own piece, but they continue to do this until all of the pieces are on the board. Now, I will just place these on here randomly to show you the next part of the game. They would continue to do this all the way through. They can, if their turn came up, create a mill early, but usually that doesn't happen until all of the pieces are on the board. So at this point, all of the pieces, all 18, are on the board. Now they begin the second phase of the game, where pieces can begin to be moved. Now, the only legal move that a piece can make is by sliding along a line to another intersection. This piece could move there. This piece on the corner could move here, or from its original spot, it could move here, again, with the intention of making a 3 in a row, or a mill. You cannot go on top of another piece, and you cannot jump over another piece. You can only slide one spot. Now, as soon as you do make a mill, if you have 3 in a row here, if this player had just created that, once you have made a mill, you can remove one of your opponent's pieces anywhere on the board. So as this mill was created, they can remove a piece. As the next player begins their turn, one of their opponent's pieces could be taken. These pieces then become dead pieces. They cannot be placed back on the board. There is no way to gain a piece. You can only lose pieces. Now the game continues, and I will just remove these pieces. I will also say when you make a mill and one of your opponent's pieces is taken off, it is referred to as pounding to remove another player's piece. The game continues until one player is left with only 2 blocks, making them unable to make any more mills. And the white pieces, in this case, would win. This game not only was played during the Roman period and times of antiquity, but it was also very popular as a very mobile, simple game in the colonial period. Players could carve a game board like this into the sand with their finger, and pieces could be made from either 9 stones and maybe 9 seashells, or 9 pine cones and 9 marbles or something like that. So it was a very, very mobile game for many people, but there are also carved boards and very ornate boards that were created during these periods. There were other games that came after 9 Men's Morris, like chess and checkers, and things like tic-tac-toe may have been influenced by the creation of this game. This program, of course, I'm sure raises some questions. So if you have any, please do put them in the comments box. Before I wrap up, I do want to remind everyone that the museum has a drawing for 2 books by an author named Adrian Miller that is going on right now. Adrian spoke with the museum a couple of weeks ago about his book, Black Smoke, African Americans and the United States of Barbecue. Adrian has very kindly donated 2 signed copies of his book that are up for drawing. Adrian was featured in the much anticipated Netflix series High on the Hog, which premiered last week, speaking about Hercules Posey, the enslaved chef of George Washington. Hercules Posey was actually found solving a 218-year-old mystery by researchers here at the Westport Museum, and are credited in part in this Netflix series. To win one of these 2 signed copies of Black Smoke, we encourage you to sign up for our newsletter where you can purchase your drawing tickets for $5. And we do encourage you to do this quickly, as the drawing will close this week when we announce the winners on June 3rd in our newsletter. So please do grab some of those tickets before they are gone. I want to thank you all for joining me today. I do hope you enjoyed seeing all of our games, and I hope that you have a wonderful evening, a wonderful rest of your week. Thank you.